Welcome to the Education Podcast, where it's all about helping people and organizations unleash their greatness. The Education Podcast features lively discussions.
When they share it, you see that they're beginning to feel empowered.
My heart, it's full of pride for me to be at Mai Samoa.
You don't necessarily need a degree these days. There's so many pathways to success.
Welcome to the Education Podcast. Welcome to the Education Podcast, where we help you unleash your greatness personally and professionally. Today, we're addressing a topic that is often shrouded in silence but demands our attention: sexual abuse. This conversation is essential for creating safer communities and fostering greater understanding and support for those affected. Our guest, the remarkable Dr. Alexander Stevens II, a senior Māori lecturer at AUT, founder of StandingTallNewZealand.org, and a semi-finalist for the 2025 New Zealander of the Year, brings profound insights to this discussion. With decades of experience as a visionary leader, Dr. Stevens shares his thoughts on the origins of predatory behavior, the role of social media and AI, and the correlation of increasing the risk of suicide, and the steps we can take to support victims and promote recovery. We delve into prevention strategies, explore how communities can offer meaningful support to survivors, and discuss the profound influence of technology in shaping the conversation around abuse. If you ever wondered how to better protect loved ones, help survivors reclaim their voices, or address the pervasive issue in a meaningful way, this episode is for you. Well, it's great to have you on the show again.
Thank you.
Dr. Alexander Stevens II, part two.
Am I the second person am I the first to come back?
2 times.
Excellent.
Excellent. But obviously, for those who don't know, you reached out, and I didn't even know until you mentioned it. But can you maybe talk about that?
Yeah. So kia ora, I'm Dr. Alexander Stevens Te Tuarua. I have a background in education, health, financial capability, the whole shebang, and all of it centered within a kaupapa Māori/Pacific paradigm. I reached out to you because I found out maybe less than a month ago that I'd been nominated for 2 awards under the New Zealander of the Year. Yay. And I thought, actually, if I was going to do some kind of podcast or some kind of follow-up, I'd rather do it with you, because I find it much more meaningful to have real conversations than saying other people that I might know.
Oh, that's very
so here
fun.
we are.
Yeah. Well, hey, you're always welcome on the show, regardless whether you got New Zealand of the Year or a nominee.
I won't, though, because let's be real, the chances of sexual violence recovery being recognised, I don't think is going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, because there's some other beautiful whakaaro, there's other beautiful things. So last year's one, I think, was in environmental science, right? So people like the light, fluffy stuff, but then when you've got this hard stuff, it's like a little bit much. Although I am grateful, right, that people have nominated me. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be a semi-finalist, but I will be absolutely blown away if it goes anywhere beyond what it is.
Yeah.
But I'm thankful.
That's still a big deal, like being a semi-finalist for New Zealand of the Year. Like, you were recognised for something great, the work that you're doing. Why do you think you got nominated? I mean, you don't even know who it was.
No.
That's the thing.
Yes.
You just found out.
Yes.
Right? And when you found out, what were you like? Well, how did you feel when you
Well,
found out?
most people were saying, I was so excited. I was actually annoyed. I was like, who's nominated me, and who do I have to track down? So, and then afterwards, I actually, this is kind of interesting, because I don't really like the attention behind it. In all seriousness, I actually just like to do behind the scenes mahi, get the job done, move on to the next daru, the next problem.
Yeah.
So, in a way, I think it's good, in terms of it gets the topic out there. There's been a lot of significant things that have happened this year. One of them was the government's apology for all our communities who had been affected by both sexual as well as physical abuse in state care, and I use the word care quite loosely, And so timing wise, I think it's really, I don't know. It's kind of like done a full circle that here we are, having someone that I guess has been nominated for work around helping people to find a way forward. Because actually, lots of those, and I said this in the last podcast that we did, most guys that I work with have actually been in state care, and they've ended up going through the gang cycle because to them, might as well, connect with a whānau, and even though you might get hurt, at least you know where it's coming from, whereas you had these so-called people that were supposed to care for you do actually far more harm and significant trauma than even when they were at home. And sometimes actually a lot of our bros had been taken away from very good families. It was just that they were Māori and Pacific, and racism and prejudice kicked in. So yeah, it's an interesting time anyway for our communities to be seen, heard, and valued.
Yeah, not all heroes wear capes, and the work that you're doing is not really, it's unsung work. Like, you don't really hear about it as much, but it needs to be more visible. It needs to be heard more often, talked about more often, to be normalized. I mean, the apology is great, and it's brought more recognition and highlighted there is a huge need for it, and why the work you're doing in this space is needed, right? I guess what since our last interview, it's been a couple of many months now.
It's almost been a year, I think.
Yeah, almost a year. There you go, year anniversary. What difference have you seen? What trends have you seen since then?
Well, from the last podcast that we did, and I told you that this would happen, I think we reached double digits. So maybe 11 or 12 men have come forward. So that would work out roughly one a month. Yeah, that would work out right. That would be about 12 months since I've seen you. So for those people that saw our last podcast, kind of connected in with some of the stuff that they had heard and decided to reach out to get help. So if you're looking at what some of the I suppose the rewards of doing something like this is being able to connect with our respective communities to help our men in particular, let them know that you can get help. There is a way forward. I think the other thing that's also been useful also is being able to allow support people who have got someone that they know who's told them that they've been abused. Here are some options and support available as well. So to me as a health practitioner, not only is it about helping our bros to get help or support people, but I also know through research, we also do things like just that one thing of, coming forth from our podcast, can do things like reduce suicide, reduce mental anguish, reduce addictions, and reduce harm. One of the things that I practice is 7 generations. So, if one of our bros is alive and decides not to kill themselves, then obviously that's going to flow on in a positive way for 7 generations to come. We also know conversely, when our men don't get help, it ripples out in negative ways in 7 generations. So, for me, health, when I practice health, it isn't just current. I also think intergenerationally, as well, because we do have a responsibility to uphold our wellness. Yeah.
And what I love about your work is obviously a lot of people have reached out for help, which means that you're approachable. And this.
Well, I think you're being modest, my friend. I think the chemistry between us obviously connected with people. I mean, one of the things that I say about our Māori and Pacific is that we're good BS detectors, and we know when something is a bit off. So for our communities to actually say, listen, I need help, tells me that they've connected because they see our genuineness in terms of wanting to reach out and support people. Yeah.
Well, you've created a place, or a go-to space whenever they need help, right? So if that didn't exist, then what would be the other option, right?
Yes.
It'd be hard to think of that. I know that a lot of your mahi is amazing, and you approach sexual abuse recovery, especially with a Te Ao Māori lens, and a healing from a Te Ao Māori lens. And we always know that, easier said than done, but, there's always the other side of it is prevention.
Yes.
Right? And you're talking mass scale here when you're talking about hundreds of, young people who have gone through the system and state care, and who have been sexually abused. Like, it's now we're dealing with the recovery and the healing and supporting. And that's
Yes.
always going to be needed, like the ambulance at the end of the cliff.
Absolutely.
But what's your thoughts around the preventative side of things, whether it's in the home, the family, as parents, in the community? How can we prevent these things from happening? What are your thoughts? It's a big question.
It's a big question, yet it's something that I have been asked a few times. So, slight deviant change. When I worked in smoke-free services, we aimed to help New Zealand become smoke-free by 2025. So that's next year, right? So we looked at 100% of the country, or Māori and Pacific, that was my area, to stop smoking as a collective, right? So that was the ambitious goal, like 15 years ago, and then we worked as a collective in terms of making that happen. So it's not like we haven't set ambitious goals before. One of the challenges is, how do you stop sexual harmful behavior? And the answer is, I just don't know. Some people, so one of the things that I do is that I do travel across the country, right? So from the top of Hokianga, which is up north, all the way down to Taupō, Gisborne to New Plymouth. So that's my coverage area. Sometimes people will come up to me and say, the best way forward is a bullet in the brain. Other people, right, which is very final, other people believe in castration. Unfortunately, I can't support any of those approaches, because I don't believe killing someone, is the way to go. And we actually know that castration doesn't work, because there's been lots of evidence and research. They tried that in the States. So there's, so we need to stop that. There's evidence that it doesn't work, right? It is something that I do think about. How do we stop sexual harmful behaviour, and how do we get people to come forward sooner rather than later who have been hurt, to put other people aside and actually get help? In the last couple of weeks, since the recording of this podcast, we've seen people that have come forward who were involved in churches who, remember I said this before, like I used to be predators. They deliberately were being a predator towards young people. So I think we actually need to do things like, if we're working in those kind of spaces, I do think we need to do police checks regularly. Assuming, pardon? Well, across the board, I think we do actually, because a lot of the men that I work with, this is an interesting conversation, my friend. And I can see the look on your face, and I tell you why. Because many of the men that I work with want to reconnect with God, but every time they do, they think about the pastor, they think about the Sunday school teacher, they think about the person that hurt them. And so they don't know how to reconnect with their faith, for those that want to go back, right? They don't know how to connect with their faith in a meaningful way, or their relationship with God, because the person that should have shepherded them or protected them was the one that had caused harm. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to do my second doctorate in theology, to actually understand, how do we support our Māori and Pacific men and reconnect them with their faith when their faith has been broken.
Yeah, that's a really tough one. I mean,
isn't it? And so then if we play down that route, and it doesn't excuse behaviour, but that's why a lot of our men are angry and turn to things like drugs and alcohol as a coping mechanism, because their wairua is being tainted or polluted from that. I call it that toxic touch. Waikino is a good, it means rough or unsettling, especially when it comes to water. So if you imagine, on a storm, you'll get like really rough water that will kind of go down the sewage and pipes and that kind of thing. So Waikino wairua to me is the roughness of spirituality. It's when it's constantly, there's no settling of it. It's constantly in flux. And that's where I think our men have actually are in. They're in a state where they're not settled. Spiritually, they've been tainted, and they're finding a way to detox. Unfortunately, they're using coping mechanisms which appear at the surface to work. But since we're being filmed in Pukekohe, and the Waikato River isn't that far, on the surface it might look fine, but the currents underneath, are often not seen by other people, and they also need to be attended to. This is why when Mike King came out with his whakaaro around alcohol being used to reduce mental health, I just, to me, I was really upset about this, because It doesn't. In fact, it makes things worse. But what we do talk about in the sector is around this idea of self-medication. So we know that lots of our bros, and I use the word bros because they don't use the word victims or survivors, right? So we know that our bros self-medicate, but self-medicate isn't the same as what Mike, was talking about, that somehow, that you would get better, because you don't. Actually, my approach when we're working with men affected and that have that spiritual disruption is that abstinence really is the best way to go. And there's two ways about it. We can do a harm reduction approach. So some of our bros might have 2 or 3 boxes a day, so we might get them down to 1 box, half it, and then stop.
Yeah.
Right? But then, even then, it's where's the spiritual connection that needs to then come in? Yeah.
Yeah.
We went on a bit of a...
No, it's a good journey. It's a good conversation. It's a conversation that we need to have. But, especially with things that you hear on the media, yes, it's bringing light to in conversation to this topic, but at the same time, it almost leaves a stain.
Yes.
Like you've probably seen in the media recently, and you've mentioned it as well with like things that happen at churches. You might have a pastor
Can I
or
say
Sunday
that
school.
sexual abuse happens everywhere. So
It
not
happens
just churches,
everywhere.
but it's...
Yeah. Well,
But
even
just in the
even
media.
in state care, in state care.
Yeah.
So, but you might have 1 or 2 idiots who do silly things like that and abuse people, and then now it leaves a stain for state care and all those who are trying their best to help. Even in churches, like there are generally some good people there trying to help, but it's been tainted.
Yes.
And it's been, I wouldn't say polluted, but there's now a stigma that's been created because of people within there who have decided to do something that's wrong.
Right.
Right? That doesn't help the situation at all. Right? In fact, it just even creates more fear. It's like, I can't trust anybody.
Yes.
I can't be safe anywhere. Like, that's not a world you want anybody to grow up in.
Which is why that word waikino, or the unsteadiness of water, the rough waters, that's why I use that word.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Talk more about that. We live in an imperfect world. We live
Absolutely.
in this imperfect world. There are imperfect people. You are going to have people who do dumb things. Right? And dumb is
Define
just...
dumb, though.
Dumb. Oh, sorry. Yes, I got to say dumb.
Yes.
Who abuse people sexually.
Right. Yes, because I'd say that's deliberate, not dumb.
And it's interesting you mentioned that. Yeah, you're right. That's not dumb, but I'm using it because I'm afraid to... Not afraid, but I hate using that word because it reminds me of something negative.
Right.
But
it is,
even
though, right?
then, and it is, and you're right.
Yeah.
I liked how you said, what is dumb? Because now I don't want to confuse it more, and I can't sweep it under the carpet
Yes.
almost, and I can't be afraid to talk about it.
Yes.
So I'm talking about people who abuse...
Yes.
Sexually
Yeah,
abused
sure.
people. Right?
Yes.
Those are the ones I'm talking about. How do we live in a world with all of that happening? And you're talking to people who are recovering as well.
From being abused, yeah?
Yeah.
Look, I've been doing this for a long time. If you realise how many people are on the road that are high, mentally unwell, you wouldn't really get out of your home. This is why when I drive, I am so cruisy now. Someone wants to push in front, hey, go for gold. Someone slamming on their horn, I'll pull over, go. It's just not worth kind of thinking about. We don't know. I mean, this is a great example. We don't know how many predators, for example, are in New Zealand. When I said to you before, it roughly works out 1 in 5 Pacific have been affected by sexual abuse, 1 in 4 for our males and 1 in 3 for our females, when the general population is 1 in 4 women and 1 in 8 men. So actually our numbers are high, but we don't even know how many people actually go out there. There's so much that's unknown. And yet, this is where I think things like faith and wairoa actually become important components to help nourish you and give you faith to find a way forward. For example, every week, so no matter where I am in the country, every week on the Friday, just before I wrap up and head back to Auckland, last week, for example, I was by the Waikato River. I just stayed there for just an hour, just looking at the current. I've done the Serenity Prayer more times in the last 3 months than I have in the last year. just acknowledging, look, this is how much I can control. This is how much is outside of my control. And in this moment, all I can contribute is this bit to help our bros and families. So, when I think about that waikino whakaaro, that the unsteadiness or the roughness of water, all I can do is just provide a safe haven temporarily for our men, working with them around some tools and resources to kind of get them to the next port. Give you a quick example. So we're in December, right? So court's coming to a close. So there's been maybe 5 or 6 times that I've been, brought to court to help give evidence or to be a support person or an advocate for our bros. So that might be an example of, that lots of them are either angry, they're upset. I talk about inner child, so they might be, say, in their mid-30s or early 40s, but it's almost like you're being there for that scared 5 or 6-year-old, in an adult body, and there's the offender there. And so that you can imagine all that chaotic flow that stirs around. All I can be in that moment is just say to them, hey, look, remember everything that we've been working on to get you in this state, to help you to get this person charged and or in jail.
Yeah.
As an example.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when we walk out, and I acknowledge that person, because it's heavy, right? That stuff is heavy. That's when I find, like, Tortara Park isn't that far from where I live, right? So I just tend to go for a bushwalk, or if there's a river or a lake, or even a beach, actually, now that I think about it, I'll just kind of chill there just for an hour and just kind of process what's happened and do my best to kind of flow it. And then meet the next person.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit more positivity.
Cool.
In terms of, I'm not saying that anything that we've said is negative at all.
No,
but I'm saying, like, to add, to not just shine light on the problem, but let's talk more about solutions as well. And there was this video I watched on TikTok, and for our audience, forgive me if I mention this one here, but it was they were interviewing a pedophile,
right? And
they asked him, "How do you choose your victims?" Mm-hmm. And that pedophile said, and this was a real person. He's still in prison, but they were just interviewing him. They just want to understand his mindset. Yes. And basically, he said, "I look at the family. I look at the father. If I feel like the father is not a threat to me, then that's how I choose my targets, my victim, the kids." So looking at and I mean, like, if that's the mindset of some of the predators, if we're talking about that, and they look at, like, men or fathers and father figures, is there anything around that, any advice you can talk to around, especially, like, men within families and protecting their families?
Yes.
And how that helps, I guess, prevent some of these issues from happening.
Yeah. There's 2 things that come to mind. One, silence is incredibly powerful. Silence has the ability to either create a space, a va, wa, whatever you want to call it, to enable healing to begin, but it can also do the opposite as well, which can create harm. In other words, no one talks about it. People know about it, but nothing's being said, right? So the way forward, in terms of, if you're looking at solution focus, because I'm very much a solution focused person. Yes, dark stuff happens, and how do we find a way forward? So to me, it always starts with the family, right? And what are the values that we're teaching our children? One of the things that when I used to work at rape prevention education, was talking about open communication. And being able to tell your parents or parent what is happening, even if it feels embarrassing and or something to be ashamed of, especially when it comes to that topic, because the sooner that our young ones come forward, the sooner that they can get help. So, my research, we looked at many of the men, so I did some research that looked at men, many of them tried to come forward from the age of 5 or 6 and talk to their teacher initially. They didn't know how to respond, and then they waited until they were in their mid-20s, often when they were going to become a dad, because they were a bit scared. Does that mean I'm going to be a pedophile? And the answer is no. Actually, if anything, you're more likely to be super protective of your children, because you don't want them to get hurt, which has good and bad sides to it. And then for those of our bros that didn't get the help, then they were often would come forward as a spiritual release near the end of life kind of situation, like dialysis and or cancer. So I think that the way forward is actually applying our Māori and Pacific values, in that we should be talking and doing a collective approach, because there is strength in numbers. I'll never forget the stat around when the Families Commission existed, like reducing suicide by 50% is as easy as having dinner at the table with the whole family, which doesn't happen now. Most people are either on their phones or watching TV or on their lappies, But actually, if you're truly wanting to build a strong family, whether that be with your wife or, your family. So my one is, I define it as all my bros that I work with, standing tall and all my other roles, is by having meals together and actually talking about how's your day been, how's your week been, what's it looking like, and being able to share those spaces. So something that would be I guess that would be, if I had one piece of advice, that would be it. Go share spaces with healthy food with the Heart Foundation tick, and actually talk about what's happening. Because then what you're doing is you're setting up spaces where people then can feel safe to be able to let people know this is what's happening.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that concept of the vow, the wow. It's not so much the place, it's the space, spiritually, mentally, emotionally.
All the above.
All of the above. And I like what you said around as parents or as a family, it's like, preventing or reducing the risk of suicide is as easy as having dinner around the table.
Yes.
Wow, that's powerful.
And it is. And that's what I'm saying. It doesn't require an app or some piece of equipment, that you might get from the warehouse or Kmart or whatever. Actually, what I'm asking you to do is to come together as a collective and actually spend time with each other, build those relationships.
Yeah.
Because actually, experience has shown me time and again, when the brown stuff hits the fan, it's often your family, however you define it, that you'll always go back to for support.
I like that because we're coming back to my example around the pedophile who says they look at the father. It's not so much like, for me, when I heard that, my first initial reaction was like, cool, I'm gonna stay strong and fit so I can smash anybody that messes with my family. But I think what you're saying as well is like, it's not just about that, it's about the relationship that the father has with their children. It's not just about the ability to protect. It's a relationship. If you've got a relationship where your daughter comes to you for refuge, for safety, for advice, and just open, right? They feel safe around you. No one would want to mess with that. Yeah. But if you've got a relationship between a father and daughter where they just don't get along, they clash, they don't talk, like that's easy pickings.
Yes, or fathers, daughters, and sons.
Huh? Like father and son, sorry.
And daughters, but just children, right?
That's right, children in general.
That bond, that we know that hurt people, right? And we know that divorce rates are high and that there is an absence of dads, right? And so that's the perfect opportunity for when people come in and say, well, he's not here, so I'm going to do this bit to make out as though, I can be some kind of substitute dad, but actually here is my intentions underneath the surface. So actually, for when I used to do couples counselling, albeit briefly, one of the things I spoke about is that even if you're separated, actually, to not let that spill out and affect the relationship with your children. That just because you might not see eye to eye, your children will pick that up, and then those learned behaviours become ingrained later on in life, which is then that 7-generation thing. And so it's about then how do we create 7 generations of healing and wellness. And I guess that's the thing that talking to you has reminded me of, is that, I'm still in cycles of working with people where they're just at the cusp of getting themselves well, but then they're often not only a dad, but they're a koro as well. So then there are 2 generations that they'll have to actively work on to get them into a state of wellness. Yeah.
Well, it reminds me of this saying, the greatest gift a father could give their daughter and their son is to love their mother. I like that saying because the gift is the example, the role model, and like this is how you treat or love somebody. And even if, like, coming back to your point, even if they're divorced or not separated, you can still respect and you can still show love and aroha towards that, you know, and children pick up on that. What do you...
And they do. I've been in family courts enough just this year to see parents go at it with each other. And then when I see an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, I think this 8-year-old and 10-year-old will remember this. I know they do, because later on, you know, like some adults that I see talk about being pulled in and out of family courts. So that's what I mean, you know. Yeah, find a way of being amicable as best as possible, I guess, is what I'm saying to people whose relationships are ending. And I know that's easier said than done. But when you look at those kids, I mean, ideally, I would love to get myself out of my role and become unemployed in terms of working in mental illness, addictions, and sexual violence recovery. That would be amazing. And so that could only happen once we start having these, you know, conversations like this, and strengthening our homes.
Yeah. And the sad thing is, I don't think that would happen for a long time.
It won't be in my generation, but, you know, it was a couple of podcasts ago that you interviewed Sione, who is my mentee, and so then I look at him as the next generation that will hopefully pick up, you know, where I'll leave off.
Yeah.
I mean, we can only do this much, really, in the grand scheme of things, and just hope that it's enough to get people through. Yeah, and then trust that the next generation of practitioners,
I love that.
will do their bit.
I love that mindset.
Oh, he better do it. You know, I'm just looking right now and he'll watch this.
Well, again, that's another Te Ao Māori view,
Yes.
where you're thinking generational, rangatiratanga, like nurturing the next leaders, passing the baton on, not just withholding all the information for my glory, for my reputation.
Yeah.
It's like, look, like you said, life is this short,
Yes.
and I'm only here for this much.
Yes.
You know, so it's about how do we keep that legacy and that mahi living on. It's the next generation passing the baton on. I love that mindset. Are you seeing anything that's happening in the world today? I mean, there's a lot happening. Things like AI.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and people talk about wokeism and stuff
Yes.
like that. And you got, you know, with things like social media, there's so much confusion, so much influence, so much information out there. How do you know what's right, what's wrong? There's a lot of that's going on. Like, are you picking up on anything that you see like, whoa, we've got to be careful of that, because that's only going to make things worse?
Yes, I am. And it's when people self-diagnose, when people put in their symptoms into AI, and then AI spits back, you might have, but they interpret that might have as they do. So in the last couple of months, I've had a few people say, look, AI has told me I have schizophrenia, AI has told me I have bipolar, AI has told me I've got depression, and I'm either wanting some medication or some help with it. So with those people that I've worked with, they don't have schizophrenia, they don't have bipolar, they might have depression, but I think it's incredibly dangerous to use AI as a diagnostic tool for your own wellness, when actually you need somebody else to be able to administer assessments and being able to do observations, and that's the stuff that I've been doing for a long time. You know, what's the point of doing like 7+ years training? Actually, way more than that now that I think about it, when apparently AI can do it in less than 30 seconds. But it is dangerous, though, that people that take this as gospel take it as truth, that what's being said to them in the instant of a second is somehow what they've got. And can I also say that I always think AI should be used as a guide, but for academic stuff, you know, when I think about myself at AET, it should never be the primary. It should help you with your thinking, for example, but shouldn't be used as the captain of everything, because that's not how it works. So I guess those are the two things that I kind of think of. In the health system, I'm seeing people use AI to try to diagnose themselves, and I just stop. You need to go an actual serial person. And actually, sometimes people will say, well, I can't afford it. And then I would say to people, there are helplines, 0800 numbers that are free, 24/7, and available in this country. Lifeline is a good example. I used to work at Lifeline, right? They're free. You've got the gambling helpline, for example. You've got the depression line. So you've got real people that are, and I know that it's scary because then the next thing that people would try, I call it excuse-itis. It's where they give you every excuse. And I can't afford it. You've got these 800 numbers. I'm too shy. But it's like, well, actually, you've invested so much with this thing inside your head that it's living there rent-free. Wouldn't you want to, kick it out rather than have it live there any longer? And you can only do that by facing your fears and, to take that power and control away from that thing and actually reach out and get help. For example, when I told that guy that he didn't have schizophrenia, that actually what he was talking about was more anxiety, I just remember he was just relieved. He did this massive sigh, like that kind of thing. And, I've been working with him since. Yeah, it's an interesting space how AI is being used. I got a book, actually, plus you might be interested in this. Do you remember the old phone books that were like that?
Oh, you still got those?
No, but I bought a book on AI. It was made in 2000, and it talked about the possibilities of what AI, and I'm reading it right now, actually, and it's about 50% accurate. Lots of like future stargaze and stuff. But it spoke about how it will be the next thing in the next 30 to 40 years. And even though it was written in 2024, I mean, here we are. So actually it wasn't that far away, but that's how thick it was, just talking about how powerful it could be, but also how we have to be responsible in terms of managing that power. Yeah, it was really interesting.
Well, anything in that book that was, you said 50% of it was accurate.
Yeah.
What were some of those? Oh, that's happening. They got that right.
Yeah. I guess it's the ethics behind it, because AI doesn't really factor ethics in when it gives you an output or decision. If you said, write my full assessment, this is sometimes what happens at AUT, write my full assessment on A, B, and C, it just does it. Doesn't factor in actually what would happen if I did this. Nor does it consider ethics. If you say, look, these are my symptoms, what have I got? It doesn't think, oh, actually, if I give this to this person, what might happen to them? How might they be affected? Yeah, so I think, some people think that AI is brilliant, but I'm like, actually, there are things that it doesn't do because it has no way of comprehending it. The other thing I'm really thankful for, it really can't do Māori and Pacific ideology and kaupapa well, because it only draws on what resources are available. But even if you do, it doesn't stitch together to look like a beautiful garment. It looks like a kind of holy singlet, which you can kind of tell has been kind of constructed, but hasn't been thought about in the same way that, say, you and I or somebody else who brings in those values and knows how it interweaves. So I guess I'm quite happy at this point that it hasn't been able to master that. So yes, it might pass the Truman test in terms of, can it pass as being a living, a human? So can somebody tell on the other side this is a human? Maybe, but if you ask it, can it pass as a Māori or Pacific? And I would say probably not at this point.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah. Do you think it ever will?
I think it would be foolish to say it wouldn't. I just think it's a matter of time. But even then, we still have an ethical responsibility and duty about being able to manage it and put clear boundaries around it. So when's it appropriate or when's it not appropriate to use AI? Take uni, right? I'm not opposed to it. I'm not opposed to AI because actually sometimes I might use it to develop research questions that I hadn't considered. But I don't get it to do the whole thing, right? I might say, look, here are some questions and help me to develop it, looking at it from a slightly different angle. And then it might come up with like 5 or 6 suggestions. I'm like, actually, I hadn't considered that. And then I'll go away and then I'll flesh it out. And that's how it should be used. And yet we also know that, well, I've seen an increase anyway of our students, unfortunately, Māori and Pacific, that are using it to try to pretend that it's them. But if you're going to... one of the things, Pasi, I think about is I'm actually allergic to stupidity, right? I mean, I love our whānau, but I'm allergic to stupidity. And you know how normally you might ask me, like, what's one thing that's interesting about me? So one of the things I'm really trying my best is not to swear. So I insert Māori or Pacific words where I want to say something inappropriate. So I might say, man, what the fuck up do you think you're doing? Or what the fuck Tāne just happened? Like, what were you thinking? Because it's the only way I can kind of process
It's clever.
Yeah, well, it also helps me to also increase my lingo as well. Sometimes it also shocks people.
Yeah. I guess it just depends on the context.
It depends on the context, right? Hongafulu, which is my favorite Tongan word I use all the time. I was like, what's this Hongafulu shenanigans that you're doing? I was like, you're killing me. I mean, it makes no sense if you try to translate it, but in my mind, it's the best way to kind of describe what's happening.
Yeah.
Because someone thought that it'd be a good idea to go from, say, their assessment, which is clearly their own, to somehow having an articulated, structured, grammatically correct assignment where there are like 12 or 13 letter words that even I don't know within 4 days of a turnaround, and you just think, you really expect, with all the love and blessings of the world, to make me believe that this is your work, yeah. But anyway, I do think AI does have the potential to help, but it can be dangerous. One of the verses I think about is you can't serve two masters, and even though that's about money, I suspect if we don't do something about this, I suspect that AI will end up being a master to many people, who will then expect them to look after them rather than having a guide to help you with some areas of thinking.
Yeah.
We've gone down a whole rabbit hole, my friend, but that's kind of where I'm looking, especially within that mental wellness space. Yeah.
No, I mean, we have to be aware, like, that's very serious if people are self-diagnosing themselves using AI and incorrectly self-diagnosing themselves, not going through the right process and assessments.
Yeah.
It can be dangerous.
And it is, because actually part of my job is then I might so when I do my ACC work with our bros, then I'll refer them. There's a point where we do the wellness, we do the therapy, but I also know that some men really do have deep psychological hurt, which I'll then refer to, say, a psychologist, which we will then work in partnership. Now, that's something that AI can't and shouldn't do, right? We need multiple people to do a wraparound approach, which is our collective way of being. And so it should, right? And it can also hold us to account, which is what I also say to the people that I work with.
Yeah.
Whereas AI is, is a sequence of generated numbers that doesn't factor in all this stuff. So it doesn't care what it prints out because it has no feelings, and yet people take it. I don't know. That's the thing that seems to be kind of irritating me at the moment.
Yeah, it sounds like you got a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
And I think you
there'll be a few more uppers than a whakatane. I bet you by the end of next week when someone else will give me a new diagnosis.
Oh my goodness.
But this is what's happening in our community, and this is the thing about our Māori and Pacific, that we utilize technology. We always have, actually, whether it's digital, if we go, say, 200 years ago, the newest techniques to improve sales or rope or so on and so forth, right? We've always been we've always had a huge appetite for taking on new technology. It's no different 200 years ago to what it is now, except that there are things that are happening, and it's so fast and so quick. We haven't actually had time to kind of digest what it looks like, long term. So yeah. But it will. I have no doubts AI will be both. Has great potential, but it has incredible harm associated with it as well.
Yeah, and I think coming back to your point around the wraparound support and making sure you got all these people around you to help, rather than just AI. And it made me think of the saying, "It takes a village to raise a child, but it also takes a village to protect the child."
Yes,
as well, right? Something about that just resonates with me. I'm going to change gears here a little bit, and it might be a bit of a unfamiliar or weird territory to go into, but you said that hurt people, right? So if we're talking about predators, where do they come from? How do they become what they are? There's a lot of variables that make predators what they are, but like how does it all start? How do they end up becoming predators? What are your thoughts?
Here's the thing. I tend to work with our bros who haven't hurt others. I have worked with men in the past who have sexual harmful behaviour. There isn't a set recipe in terms of what creates a predator. People have different backgrounds, so when I look at those who commit sexual harm, they cover the whole gamut. So they're rich and poor, for example. They cross all ethnicities, so not one ethnicity has more set of predators than they don't. The thing that I tend to look at is around this idea of power and control. That tends to be the common point for all of them. You know, how much control and power can they have over an individual? How much power and control can they have over a family? How much power and control can they have over a community? We've seen examples, for instance, where kaumātua have passed away, and then the wives have then acknowledged that their husband was a sexual predator, and everyone knew it, but because that person had that power and control to manipulate, they I hate to say the word, they did a good job at being an awful, person. One of the things I also let people know when I do workshops around how to support people affected by sexual abuse is that it's really tempting to look out for warning signs. The only problem is that people only look out for those 3 or 4 things and might miss, other things as well. So I suppose if you're going to boil it all down, it really does come down to this idea of power and control. There's no one cookie cutter approach in terms of what makes a predator. However, when we talked about solution focused, what we can do is create families that are safe so that the chances of them being singled out will be lesser and lesser. So what you want to do is obviously reduce. You don't want to put yourself in harm's way, for example. And you also don't want to do anything that's going to potentially put you in a space of being isolated, because when you're in a position of being isolated, well, people will come in to try to fill that void, offering you snake oil and all other kinds of things to say that this is what's going to fix you, and that's often where actually things, you often become undone.
Do you feel like the things like social media, for example, it's changed a lot now, and then you've probably heard the ban in Australia for people under the age of 16, using social media or things like AI. So there's huge restrictions around that now. But just looking at social media now, and just sometimes you go on there and it's like, this is not good content. This is borderline pornography.
Yes.
On social media. And you imagine how many young people are exposed to that type of content. And it's become so normalized now. And what's even more bothering is you've got things like OnlyFans.
Right.
And they leave their links on these social platforms. So you could, as a kid that's going on it, you could easily deviate from that social platform to a place you shouldn't be in. And and you think about that. Do you think things like that are making the situation worse? Do you think
so? For our young ones, I do think we need to monitor their social media fingerprint. Where are they going? What are they? I do believe that. Some people say that that's impossible, but I think actually, for our rangatahi, I do think we have a responsibility, because actually that's where some of that grooming comes from. In fact, just thinking about it, in the last 6 weeks, we've had someone that's gone through court who catfished, pretended to be someone that they weren't. Images of our rangatahi of where they convinced them to get naked, sent them images, and then blackmailed them. If they didn't do, say, a sexual act on a video, then they would release their photos. If they didn't do this, then they were going to do this. So actually we do have, this is a collective approach, right? So I'm not saying that we become the state and go, that's bad. I'm saying that as Māori and Pacific, we've always worked as a collective, generally speaking, to look after our own villages and marae. And the way that we do that now, in this century, is that we take an active interest in what our young ones are looking at, and actually being able to help guide them towards actually what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, and what are consequences that are associated with it. Sometimes, and I get this, sometimes, and as you say, you're absolutely right, things move so fast that even my generation or our parents don't necessarily understand what's happening, yeah? However, I'm also aware, and this is something that I've had to talk to some of my friends about, is like giving your child a tablet and they're 5 to do, is not to me is not acceptable, is to try to get them to kind of be quiet or distract them. There's other ways that you can do this as well. Because I think that, and I guarantee you that this will come up as some future research later on, like the development of the brain when you're that young shouldn't have something that you can get instant gratification, actually, because then you start getting into addictive behavior stuff. I don't know about you, but as an 80s kid, we basically, I don't know how someone would see this now, but we used to, like play outside, and my mum would say, come back when the sun kind of sets. And so we would play with our friends, and we would use imagination, and we would do sports and all that other kind. And that's how we kind of built relationships. And then we kind of learnt, well, this person's a bit rough, so we won't hang out with them. But when you're online, you don't get to have all those kind of things. What you get is people with really swish profiles and people that like to kind of project themselves. But what's the substance behind it? It's what I say when I work with my clients, like, go away and have a look, in terms of my media stuff. And if it fits within what you're wanting, awesome, let's work together. But the moment that it doesn't, or if you feel like it's not aligning, then let's find a way forward. But that requires the ability to negotiate and communicate, and that's what we should be doing with our young ones anyway. I mean, at some point, we've got to trust that we've raised them to the point where they can hopefully be, good citizens of this country. And I often think that we can't avoid every single thing that's going to hurt them, unfortunately. Yeah. But how do we prevent it as best as possible? Quick example, I was catching up with one of my colleagues when we used to work at Rape Crisis, and one of the things that we were talking, so I've never drunk alcohol before, because in my dad's side there's history of alcoholism, so I have no interest in getting triggered. That somewhere in me there might be some little gene that switches on and says yes, let's kind of do it. But one of the things when we were working with young people is around how do we drink responsibly, if that's what you decide to do, but also that you bring all your mates back home that night. You just don't leave them or take photos of them unconscious, put it on Facebook, put it on Instagram, and then start laughing. It's like, when did that become, so there's lots of things that we have to kind of do. And I know that it sounds hard and challenging and some people don't want to do it, but I think that's probably one of the things that we can do to create, safe var or wa, so that when people are hurt, they know that they can always come back and get the support that they need.
Yeah. We can only prevent so much. And,
Agreed.
You said, we can only shelter, block, and,
yes.
Guide our kids. Don't make this decision. These are the consequences. At the end of the day, this is the world they live in.
Sure.
There's always going to be opposition in all things. And it's like, how do I navigate that world then? But this is why, this is just a personal thing for me. This is why I like putting content out there that I strive to put more positive, informative, and good content that helps people obviously unleash their greatness. Right? And so I feel like there needs to be more, especially from our Pacific and Māori, more positive content, because that's one of the ways that we could drown out the noise and the confusion, is creating more content, positive content that uplift, inspires, educate.
Yes.
I spoke at an event a couple of weeks ago, and there was all the people in industry, providers, and I said, look, we've got to look at education differently. Education can't just be books and classrooms. Education can't just be training. Education also has to be about influence. We have to think outside the classroom or influence outside the classroom, especially if learning is a lifelong journey, not just at school. And I think about, people who use platforms like TikTok and social media, they're now going on there to get educated. So if they might be using AI, that's a side thing. But actually for a long time, people have been listening to influencers, getting their information from them, right? So if that's where people are going to learn and hang out in these spaces, why aren't we in those spaces?
Yes. Exactly.
Why aren't we creating content to influence them in that space? Why are we letting all these other people, all this other noise, educate and influence our children?
Yes.
Yeah, well, what are your thoughts on that? Around producing more good
to
help combat the negative?
I think when I think about this, I think of the nature of wairuatanga. I think of the nature of spirituality, right? Let's just go deep here for the remainder of our time. So this is what I think, that it's seen and unseen at the same time. So we know that negative social content does impact on us, right? In the same way that it does for good. So what we're seeing at the moment is a lot of media content where people seem to live like their best lives, because that's how it often is recorded. But what you don't see are those other struggles. So people assume that this life must be wonderful and amazing, right? But actually it's not. There are also struggles, and like I said to you before, we need to struggle, because how else do we learn? How else do we grow? I mean, when we're talking about our children, we obviously don't want them to repeat all our mistakes, but then some of them they're going to anyway. And so anyway, but when I think about the media stuff, I'm always mindful about what is it that I put out there. How would I feel in 10 years' time if I saw something? Would I regret it? So far, I haven't. I'm also really careful what I put out there too, because since I've got that PhD, being a doctor does hold a sense of responsibility around duty of care, and I have zero interest in saying something that might be harmful. So, my general approach in the media, and even if I'm being interviewed by fine people like yourself, if I don't know an answer, I'd rather just say, I don't know, rather than pretend to say something for a good, effective soundbite. The other thing, when I within my role as, say, a kaupapa Māori researcher, is we already know what's wrong in health and social, and all those other things, because media and research tells us, right, that we're all gold medalists on all the wrong things. So then it's looking exactly what you're saying. So I mean, how do I, as a researcher, work towards creating outputs that show actually what are the things that we're good at, and what are the things that we can do to combat these things, without being seen that we're the worst people out there. Quick example, when I worked at in smoke-free services, people would say, quitting smoking is the best thing that you can do for your health. That was a whole spiel that we had to do. I would say to people that wanted to quit, right? You're clearly a good budgeter, because you've budgeted your week's worth of cigarettes. So how can I convince you to utilize budgeting as a skill to save some money? For example, I'll give you a quick example. So there was someone that wanted to get an extraction done, but couldn't afford the couple $100 that it would to get it out, because it's not cheap. And I said to them, okay, well, look, you're interested in quitting smoking. Why don't we do this over 6 weeks? You're a really good budgeter, because you clearly have budgeted your money for your cigarettes every single week, right? So you're telling me that you can't afford it, but if we stopped buying, say, a packet a day, you'd save yourself maybe $500. So by the end of the month, you'd have your money. So let's see truly how committed you are, to quitting. So the motivation wasn't to quit smoking for their health. It was to get their tooth extracted. They did it. Then you work on a strength-based approach, and you say, okay, well, if you've done it for a month, let's give it a go for 3 months. So once we know that they could hit that 3-month mark, they're much more likely to stay smoke-free for 6 months, 9 months, and 12 months. And I had one person who saved something like 10K within a year.
Wow.
Purely from stopping smoking, because they were told that they were a good budgeter.
Wow.
Right? So it really is those small things that we can do in media. I think that you and I do have a responsibility to be able to support people. If we're putting ourselves out there, to give people factual information, to help them kind of make up their own mind. And obviously it works, because like I said, the last time that we did this podcast, we had men and support people come forward and wanted to get help, either from their own experiences of being sexually abused, or knowing someone that they had. So they'd gone away and done some research. It's hard for me, because sometimes I'll try to correlate the Standing Tall website to when like a media thing will come out to see. There's often an increase, but it's hard to know whether that it was because of that. But I'd like to think that, that the work that you and I do is genuine, and that we're wanting to uphold the mana and dignity of our community, rather than exploit them and use them for personal gain.
I love that. You talked about passing the baton on, and you're in the same mindset
The
as I am.
sooner the better.
The
Yep.
sooner the better. But we acknowledge that there's a limitation to life, and we have our time. So, what do you want to achieve before you leave this earth?
Yeah, what a great question. Well, there's three things that kind of come to mind. One, I'd like to create a space of those people that I'm currently mentoring will be not only better versions of themselves, but will hopefully work their way, learning from my own mistakes and also kind of getting themselves into better positions financially. So, quick example, with one of my mentees, one of the things that I learned from working at the retirement commission is that if we can get our 20-year-olds to start getting into a habit of putting 10% away towards KiwiSaver, and then, the employee meets with 3% as their minimum contribution, so it's 13%, they're much more likely when they hit retirement, they'll be financially stable, right? So they can probably hit that probably $1.5 million mark actually by the time they hit 65. Hopefully nothing else kind of happens, and we can already see that. I can think of one mentee that went from $1,000 when I initially met him to 13 months later having almost 20 grand
Wow.
in his bank, purely because he's just applying what he's learning. But same thing, right? Give it a go, and if it works, awesome, keep going. And if it doesn't work, stop. So that's the first thing. How do I help future generations get ahead? Because we kind of live in this society, Pussy, where people want to get rich now. But if you haven't learned the skills in terms of how to maintain that wealth, you're going to lose it. I talk about how money rots. So they spend. Like, look at me, I've got a watch, I've got the flashiest car. It means absolutely nothing 6 months from now if you've got nothing to show for it and no gas in your car, kind of thing, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is I'd like to think that within my own nephews and nieces, if they wanted aspirations of going, say at uni, some people don't want to do uni, that's fine. But if they wanted to, at least they've got an example of someone that's been able to do it. And I guess the third thing for me personally, before I kind of bowed out, is to think that I have really done my best to try to be a good human being. I've made plenty of mistakes, don't worry about that. But I've really done my best to kind of learn from it. So that the one thing I've learnt over many years, Pussy, is that in this country, it's 3 degrees of separation. Where you and I might know like we live in a very small country. So, there's this thing around acting with integrity and kindness. And in my mid-40s, that's what my approach is now, because you just never know when you might see that person or they might know somebody else. And then you walk away and you'll be like, any second now, they're going to be like, how do you know that person? And it's a good example of whether it's going to be a Waikino conversation where they're going to give you every single thing about it, or it might be a Wairua conversation where it'll be like a deep, soulful kind of cordial. And it happened yesterday at AET graduation, where I took my mentor, celebrated, and then I saw one of my work colleagues I really get along with, and I said, hey, A meet B, B meet A, and where it could have been awkward if I didn't like the person, so. Yeah, I guess for me, I'd like to kind of leave this earth without harming, another person. Yeah, that would be my intention.
I can feel it. It comes from the heart, and you do want what's best, and you're thinking about the next generation. You want to leave the world a better place, and I like that. What's one thing that you wish more people knew about sexual abuse recovery? And those who might be going through it?
Yeah. Well, if I talk broadly, the first thing is, the one thing I've learned is you just don't know what another person's carrying. They could have the biggest smile. Our Māori Pacific, we have the biggest smiles. When I've travelled across the world, I've never seen smiles like I do until I come out to the Pacific Ocean. And then those smiles, they're massive, but you never know what's behind it, right? So this is why I think that there's no excuse to treat someone unkindly, because you just don't know what's happening behind the scene. And actually, your act of unkindness might be the last act that person might experience before they think, that is it, I'm done, right? So that's the first thing that I genuinely think about. And even when I get moody, I have to go, I just have to calm the whakatane down and just go and go, and try to engage with the person with kindness and respect, easier said than done. But when you're working with sexual abuse, we talked about this VAR or WA, or Te VAR might be the other one I was thinking of. It does take time and space. So don't go in there thinking, why is it my part? It's been 3 weeks and they're not getting any better. I don't understand what's happening. It's like it's 3 weeks. How long have they taken to come forward? 30 years. Do you think it's realistic that we're going to work through 30 years of trauma within 3 counselling sessions? No. Great. Nah me. So being kind to yourself and others, I think, is key, and it does take time and space. Some guys, for example, I've seen for maybe 4 or 5 years, they have had extensive trauma. Some guys I see less than 6 months. Some of them are 6 weeks, because it kind of depends. There's a level where it kind of caps, where they've had as much as they can. They need to step back, apply some of what they've learned, and then they come back. Some don't. So, all I say to people is we don't talk about va or wa enough in this country. We talk a lot about wairoa. But actually, what I say, Pasi, and I'm going to be doing a paper about this, is that va and wairoa are siblings that need each other to exist. We need spaces.
Say that one more time.
That va or wa and wairoa are siblings that work together in partnership. And I think that Māori, we don't really talk about that wa that much. Our Pacific whānau still talk about te va or va, but we don't. And I think that's because we've been removed from talking about that. And, sorry, now I'm going down my own wa, but wairoa and wa, or space and time and spirituality, coexist together to create spaces where you can have moments to be able to practice your own faith and your own healing. And it also helps you to find a way through trauma, creating safe spaces. Then you flow the wairoa through that gets them through to their next bit.
How do you create that wa?
Yes.
For someone, for yourself?
No, keep going. What were you going to say?
That's my question.
Oh,
how do you create the wa, the va, that safe space?
Yeah. This is where I think it takes time. I think one of the greatest things that we have as men is being able to create brotherhoods. I always think if you can create a kava group, if you can create a drinking group, you can create your own wa of bros that you can trust to find a way forward without getting, drunk or blottoed, right? And I think for me, if I left you with a word, pokorere is like a gut instinct. When it doesn't feel right, it's what I say to our whānau.
Intuition.
Yeah. Intuition or pokorere, and to me, it's about trusting people, and sometimes you'll get it right and sometimes you won't. There's a group, I call them the STAN group, so it's the first initial of our names. They're all social workers and myself that I've known since I was 20. So most of those guys I've known for half my life. So they've seen the ups and downs, and so I've created these groups that I kind of go to for different purposes. So some of them might be, hey, look, I've got a guy and he's got this issue, how do I bring this brotherhood together to draw on their knowledge? There are other groups that I might draw on if I'm wanting to understand how do I work, say, within a Tongan framework or a Samoan framework, that don't want to go and see someone who's PI because that's where the abuse has come from. They want to see a Māori person, but still there's an expectation of having some kind of experience with Pacific, right? So being able to spend time building connections, then you start to kind of formulate who can you spend that va or wa with. And then when we have moments like this, and when people connect, like people that watch this, that's when that wairoa starts to flow through. I genuinely think when people read this title, they'll probably think, actually, this might be of interest to me. So their wairoa is flowing. We've created the va or the wa, and now our wairoa is flowing. And then there's like a halfway point where all of us kind of interconnect, in a moment. Hopefully that people kind of feel a bit more relieved, a bit more empowered, ready to kind of get going with whatever's happening next. Yeah.
Great advice for creating the wa and va there. I love that. And we've had a really good conversation. We've gone here and there.
And everywhere.
Everywhere, which is good for me because I wanted the conversation to flow naturally, and I felt like we've discussed what we needed to, touch on some really great points here. So I'm sure our audience is going to take a lot of value from our kōrero today. And again, it's nice to have had you again on the podcast for the second time. I'm sure at this rate we're going to have you on every year because it looks like every anniversary thing.
If we're doing an AI thing, bring Bring me in.
All right. Sounds good.
Bit of kirimihi.
Yeah. But look, thank you again for your time. Before we end off, we want words of encouragement, but what's your biggest takeaway for our audience from our conversation today?
Oh, biggest, like some kind of inspiring thing?
Yeah. One big takeaway, what would it be?
Yeah, hold on to those people that mean everything to you, because you'll regret it the most when they're not there. There you go. I went down the Wairoa, but I'm absolutely serious. This year, very quick story. I lost one of my friends, Efessel, who I had known since I was like 8, Efessel Collins. I'd known since I was 8 years old. So, you always kind of think that here are these people that you love dearly and they love you and and then they're not. So, you hold on to those people that you absolutely love and value, because you just don't know when they're not there. And then you tend to only notice it with the absence of their presence. So I guess what I'm saying is, enjoy each other's company, demonstrate love and kindness, and, onwards and upwards.
Yeah. And I thank you for doing that, ending it on a high note.
Thank
And
you.
also special tribute to Efessel Collins. He was a great man, and I was heartbroken when I heard the news. But much aroha to the whānau. He definitely left a legacy.
7
And,
generations, wait and see.
It's just amazing. I love it. Again, Dr. Stevens, thank you so much for blessing us with your time and your knowledge. We're much better for it. All the best. Thank you.
Kia ora.